resume debate.
The honourable member for Langley Aldergrove.
Good. Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're here this evening, this whole weekend actually, debating the merits of a Liberal government motion to invoke the Emergency Act. But before I get into that, I want to take the opportunity to thank the many people in my riding of Langley Aldergrove who've reached out to me to encourage me and to plead with me to vote against this motion. And I can assure you that I and my Conservative colleagues will definitely vote against it. And I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or 9.5 minutes now explaining why that is. I also want to thank those people who were telling me that they are praying for the peace and security and the healing of this nation. Thank you very much. I'm praying for that as well, in what hopefully soon is going to be a post-pandemic world. So, Madam Speaker, on February 14th, the Liberal government issued a declaration invoking the Emergency Act based on their finding that there is a public welfare emergency existing in Canada at the moment. So to understand what that means, we need to take a look at the definition section of the Act, of the Emergency Act. And it states that a national emergency is an urgent and critical situation of a temporary nature that seriously endangers the lives, health, and safety of Canadians, and is of such proportions and nature as to exceed the capacity or the authority of a province to deal with it, and that cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. So very high burden of proof indeed, and that is exactly what the drafters of this legislation intended back in the 1980s. It was supposed to be a tool of last resort, not a tool of first resort. So now what is the fact situation that is alarming the government to the extent that they now feel that they have to invoke this very drastic step? Well, what we have is trucks parked in Ottawa, big trucks, rigs, clogging up the streets in downtown Ottawa. It's a real nuisance along Wellington Street, along some of the side streets. It's a real problem for local businesses here as well, and people who live in the downtown core. I and every other member in this House who have to come into this House every day had to negotiate our way across Wellington Street, and that is the same for all the employees as well in this House and working in our parliamentary offices. A nuisance, yes. An inconvenience, yes. An irritant, yes. But a national emergency, no. It fails that test. This does not attain to the very high burden that I have to share my time with the member for Eagle Creek. So thank you. Carleton Trail, Eagle Creek. So thank you. But it does not attain to the very high level that was set by the drafters of this emergency legislation. Now, the Ordinary Council also makes reference. The Ordinary Council also makes reference to blockages at border crossings in Ontario, in Manitoba, in Alberta, and in my home province of British Columbia. Now, the Liberals there have a better argument, I would submit, because that, of course, is going to be very devastating to our economy and also to our international reputation. But here's the challenge that they have. Before this declaration was made, a week ago, all those blockages had already been cleared up. How? Well, by provincial forces, by municipal forces, by provincial police forces, by the RCMP that came under provincial jurisdiction. So the police forces doing exactly what they're supposed to do. And the fact that they were successful proved that the situation did not exceed the capacity or the authority of the province to deal with it. So I submit that it fails the test. So we come back to what was going on in Ottawa. Now we've heard members on the Liberal side of the House quote the interim chief of the City of Ottawa Police Services, saying that the Emergency Act was a very helpful tool for them to solve the problem. Now, we don't dispute that at all. Of course, the nuclear option is going to be successful. We know that. There's no argument with that. But that's not the test. The test is not whether it would be successful, but whether it was necessary. And I submit that it was not necessary. The proof is that provincial police forces, municipal police forces were able to solve the problem at the borders and also control other protests that were going on in other cities across the country. So it fails the threshold. Madam Speaker, I now want to turn my attention to a constitutional analysis of what is going on. It's been pointed out on a number of occasions that the Emergency Act requires that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights be honored and respected and be maintained. Now, it's interesting that the Bill of Rights is included in that. It's an older piece of legislation, and people sometimes assume that it was subsumed in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but that's not the case. It is still good law in Canada today, and that is very useful for our analysis today because it talks about property rights for individuals. Now, what property are we talking about? We're talking about bank accounts that have been frozen under the regulations. Now, shortly after the announcement was made on Monday, my office started getting phone calls. I started getting text messages. People were saying, is my bank account going to be frozen? I made a donation to the convoy through GoFundMe. And I assured them, no, this is Canada in the 21st century. We are a modern, free, and democratic society. There is no way that your federal government is interested in donations that you might make to a cause that is important to you. But then, Madam Speaker, I actually picked up the regulation. I started to read it, and I was wrong. I was hoping that I was misreading it, so I checked with some lawyer friends of mine, and they go, no, absolutely, that is exactly what it says. So then I was hoping that maybe it was just a drafting error, but all doubt was set aside the other day when our Minister of Justice, the Attorney General, was interviewed on national television. This is how the conversation went. The interviewer asked, a lot of folks said, I don't like your vaccine mandates, and I donated to this. Now it's illegal. Should I be worried that the bank can freeze my account? And this is what the Minister of Justice said in reply. If you are a member of a Trump movement who is donating hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to this kind of thing, then yes, you ought to be worried. So there you go, straight out of the mouth of the Minister of Justice. If you have made a donation to the Freedom Convoy, then the Minister of Justice thinks that you are part of a Trump movement and that you ought to be worried. The Liberal Party is no longer the party of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It has become the party of correct political thought. You now have to think like the Minister of Justice does, or you ought to be worried. I plead with people of this, members of this House, to vote against this motion. It is incumbent upon us to do this. This is wrong legislation. We must defend Canadian rights, civil liberties. We must vote against this. I plead with the NDP party. You could make the difference. Please vote with the Conservative Party on this one. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments?